Okay, I think we should be live. Hello everybody, welcome to SerenityOS office hours. Please let me know if you can see and hear me, just to verify that everything is working. All right, we have confirmation. Great. So it's another Friday, and we're doing the same thing we always do on Friday. SerenityOS office hours. And what we do here is we take technical and non-technical questions about SerenityOS, whatever you want to talk about, and we dig into it. So it's really up to you, fine people, what we end up discussing. While we wait for our first questions, I hope that everybody had a good week. I certainly had a pretty nice one, and it was a bit of a scramble yesterday to make the monthly update video, but that is always a scramble because I like waiting until the last minute in case something very interesting happens, which has been the case many times before. So I have this, it's almost like a tradition that I just wait until the last possible moment, which does get stressful. So let's see, we got some question here. So German WTB says, how much should one rely on the compiler to make pretty code optimal / fast? So I think you should rely on the compiler to the point where actually the question is kind of upside down. What you should be doing is selecting the most appropriate data structures and algorithms that allow you to express the solution to your problem in the clearest way. Once you determine through performance analysis or profiling that you have performance issues, that's when you start to worry about code being optimal and or fast. Until you've measured an actual problem, I don't think it's really worth worrying too much about that stuff. And when it comes to the compiler, I think for the most part, you can expect the compiler to do good stuff, but like anything in life, it's a trust but verify kind of thing. So you should trust the compiler to make good decisions, but verify that it does make good decisions by looking at the generated code. And you can use tools like Compiler Explorer, for example, the Godbolt thing, to create like microcosms of your program and then verify that they generate the code that you might expect. So I hope everybody's familiar with the Compiler Explorer. It's just a fantastic tool that allows you to program in C++ on the left and see the corresponding assembly output generated by a compiler of your choice on the right. So let's see. Walter says, show off some of the amazing ARM work that Nico has been doing. So I don't have a way to show that off here locally. The only thing I can offer is the tweet that I posted yesterday, because I don't have a Raspberry Pi or anything like that. So I just have this picture to go on, which we got from Nico. And that's a Raspberry Pi 4 booting Serenity to the point of basically saying hello world, right? So it's certainly not in any kind of state that you would call like usable. We're still in the early stages of getting the kernel running, but regardless, it is interesting to see sort of the first non-desktop PC port taking some baby steps. So shout outs to Nico for working on that. Very, very cool. Let's see. John Joe McKay says, I see the audio sync is fixed. Okay, well, that's good. I didn't change anything, so I don't know why it's fixed, but I'm glad that it is fixed. I did also notice that I had audio sync issues there for a while. The extent to which I've addressed it was to run like apt upgrade a few times. And it did install a bunch of new things, so maybe something fixed it. Hello, David. How's it going? So Panta82 says, can you go into more details on how you practiced your English to make it sound native-like? How long did it take? And what was your regime like? So it's not like I had like this sort of spelled out set of exercises or anything like that. It was more that whenever I was in a situation where I would speak English, I would focus on like trying to make it sound as good as possible, like making a conscious effort to think about how do my sounds come out. What is the difference between the sounds I make and the sounds a native speaker makes? And then, you know, as many of us do, when I'm by myself, I have a tendency to talk to myself, and that's a good opportunity to practice. So I certainly practiced a lot. I think when I was very young, I would practice sometimes like reciting things, like reciting dialogue from movies and things like that. But I don't have a strong answer to this, I feel like, because I haven't really thought about it much. But as for how long it took, I think it's a process that's still ongoing. But I can tell you that 10 years ago, I had a very, very noticeable Swedish accent. And 5 years before that, it was unmistakable. So it's a process. But I think the main thing if you want to improve your pronunciation in English, is to just decide that it's something that you're going to do. Because once you set your mind to it, then you sort of switch out of this mindset of I'm just using English as a tool to communicate, and into a new mindset of English is something that exists on a scale where I'm trying to improve my number, if that makes sense. Let's see. So Dead Marshall says, have you worked with functional languages like Haskell and others? What do you think about functional programming? I have very limited experience with functional programming, so I do not have an opinion about it that is worth hearing. Poppyfire says, Mr. Andreas, can you explain in what way AI is dangerous nowadays? Does it have possibility to become autonomous like in Matrix movie alike? So that is not at all related to SerenityOS or anything that we typically talk about on this channel, so I'm going to skip that question. Drist Do Erden says, kind of same question. Is it worth to optimize with inline assembly when there is performance difference with compiler-generated assembler, or better to pray for later compiler passes will be better? Right, so there's a time and a place for inline assembly. And you're usually not in that place. So the time to bust out inline assembly is like, that's like the last resort almost, because in the vast majority of cases, choosing a better data structure or a better algorithm or both will solve your entire problem, like in the vast majority of cases. If you have the optimal data structure and algorithms, and you're still seeing performance loss, you can usually use compiler intrinsics rather than inline assembly if you want to have some CPU type primitives that are not expressible in C++, for example. So like if you want to use 128-bit integers or whatever, or other like x86 or ARM specific things, you can use intrinsics for that, and it allows you to stay sort of in C++ code, but you're using architecture-specific types. And if that doesn't work either, and you really do need to go all the way down to inline assembly, then I think by the time you've exhausted all the other possibilities, you have built up enough context that you will understand what you need to do better than I could give you an example of. I think I can't remember I can't actually remember a situation where we ended up using inline assembly. The lowest I've ever gone on professional projects has been intrinsics, and there hasn't been a need to go all the way to inline assembly. let's see. But really, like, you should focus on data structures and algorithms first. Make sure you have the absolute best ones for your problem. So Vorname Nachname says, "Hey Andreas, nice work on Serenity. Any ideas of porting a music player or developing one?" So I don't really have a plan, as people like to say, and I don't have any ideas of porting anything in particular. We do have a sound player application which plays. Currently, it's supposed to play WAV and FLAC files, so it's called Sound Player, and it's under. I am blanking out. Sound. It's obviously under Sound. Sound Player. So Sound Player plays WAV and FLACs, and this is sort of basic audio player, so it's not it doesn't play like mod music files or MIDI or anything like that. So it just plays audio files. And then for audio creation, we have the piano program, which actually will crash because I have the whole audio thing compiled out when I'm streaming. I think there has been some interest recently from a bunch of people on working on audio parts of the system, so I'm happy to see that. I am pretty uninterested in ports. I know a lot of people enjoy porting stuff, but I just have a much better time writing our own code and our own systems, so that's what I tend to focus on. So I'm happy to see people picking up the audio stuff because it is one of the less developed parts of the system. Let's see. Let me scroll back a bit. Tamash says, "Hello, Andreas. I noticed that you changed from Qt to C-Line a while back. Would you say a few words about that?" Sure. So I was using Qt Creator originally when building Serenity because I was very familiar with Qt Creator, having worked on the Qt team for a few years. So that was just what I was used to. But over time, I sort of grew a little bit tired of the limited feature set of Qt Creator. I've felt that it didn't understand C++ to the level I would like, and it also didn't feel like I could navigate as fast as I wanted to. So I decided that I was going to try some different editors. And the first one I looked at was C-Line because you hear good things about the various big IDEs, and C-Line was one of them. And when I went to look at their website, then they had a screenshot where they were demonstrating that you can even compile SerenityOS in C-Line. So because of that, I just decided that, well, since they've gone through the trouble of advertising specifically to me, I'm just gonna try it out, and I ended up really liking it, so that's what I use now. Poco Tom says, "Hey Andreas, what's the power of your eyeglasses? Do you get a headache if you don't wear while working? Love from Nepal." So the power of my eyeglasses, how do you express that? They're like -4, if that makes sense to you. It's just a standard myopia. It's pretty bad, so I can't really see without them properly enough to work. Certainly if I take them off, I cannot read what you are writing. So I normally wear contact lenses, but every now and then my eye doctor has recommended that I go a couple of days without lenses and just wear glasses instead. So that's what you're seeing right now. And I don't get a headache, I just can't see anything. Omar Alvadi says, "Good day, Andreas. Can you describe for us how the parameters are passed to a syscall, to a system call function? Is it by stack or registers? And how the user compiler knows which method to use?" Sure. So system calls are implemented in the kernel API syscall.h header. So let's go there. And the actual implementation of syscalls is done this way. So we have these invoke functions in the syscall namespace, and they basically emit inline assembly. So here is actually an example of inline assembly where you don't have a choice but to use inline assembly because there is no corresponding C++ way to express an Intel software interrupt. But anyway, so what we do is we just load up the registers. So for an argumentless syscall, we only load up the EAX or RAX register with the function number. And then as you can see here, as you add more arguments, we pass along in additional registers. But if you look in any kind of code that invokes a syscall, so like not here, let's look in libc. So the way that we invoke the syscalls is that we just have this convenience thing called syscall, where you specify the syscall number or the syscall ID or whatever, and any number of parameters that you want to pass. And then this thing takes care to select the right version of the inline assembly thing. So that's how the user space compiler knows which one to use. It just knows that it has to use the syscall interface here. And this is actually part of a library that we have called libsystem. So let me show you that. If we go to userland libraries libsystem, this is a very, very small library. As you can see, it just has two files, syscall, C, pp, and h. And the header describes the interface like this. So it's just very, very simple C API with one API per argument count or per arity or whatever you call that, like the number of arguments. That's the arity, right? Anyway, yeah, so if you have any more detailed questions about that, we can look at that, but that's basically how it works. The meaning of haste says, for someone starting now exploring Serenity codebase, what is the entry point? Where do we start? So what I always recommend to people is to use the system for a bit until something about it bothers you, and then try to figure out how that thing works and how you can make it not bother you. And everybody starts in a different place. There isn't like, oh, this is the entry point, right? Some people are perhaps have a specific interest in like a kernel, or they're interested in a browser engine, or they're interested in image editing. And whatever your interests are, whatever sticks out to you as like, oh, I would like to understand how this part of the system works, that's where you should start. That's my advice to you. Also, I like your cat emoji. German WTB says, I always wonder if you're fine being called by your first name only on Discord. That's fine, sure. It's just my name. I think, I mean, in the SerenityOS Discord, probably everybody assumes that you mean me if you say Andreas. But obviously, as the community grows, you accumulate additional Andreases. So if you want to not be ambiguous, it's good to use somebody's full name or their nickname or whatever. So let's see. Wait, is this thing not loading? Okay, here we go. So Yanis with the super chat. Thank you very much, Yanis, saying, I love the monthly update video. It's really getting longer and longer each month, isn't it? Yes, it is. And I was thinking about that yesterday, actually, when I was making it, that it used to be so easy to just sit down and mess around with the system. I would sit for like 10-15 minutes in the beginning, and it felt like, I don't know, it felt so easy. And nowadays there's so much stuff going on and so many changes going in that it takes me like a whole day to really build an idea of sort of the state of the system that I want to show off. But I do think that it's very much worth it, because not only does it sort of broadcast and show to everybody who's interested where we are with the project and how things are going, but it also sort of brings me up to speed, right? And gets me to understand exactly where we are right now. And I think if I didn't do this every month, then I would have a worse clue of how things are going. So, but yeah, it is getting longer. And I still like making them. So I'm really, really grateful that Linus has been helping me lately. It has been a huge relief because when we started going over like 1,500 commits regularly every month, that's a lot of commits to go through and and demonstrate changes and stuff. So super grateful to Linus for helping out with that. Let's see. So Drist says, thank you for explaining, I guess, about the inline assembly stuff. He's working on a string library, kind of. That's why I can't be sure about inline assembly, but portability and less work, I guess, will keep away from assembly. Yeah, basically, yes. S. Salur says, Dear Andreas, I must say that I envy you a lot. Okay, I'm not sure why, but I would caution against envy. It tends to make things worse without improving anything. I would like you to review Arrow's x86 in your spare time. Okay, I mean, I don't know what that is. Let's. It sounds like an operating system. Oh, right. It's this Amiga thing. So, I guess I should probably look at that at some point. There are a whole lot of different operating systems that I want to look at some point. But it's always easier to work on the SerenityOS stuff than getting into other things for me. Like because I always have these, I really, really want to do this thing in Serenity. So I end up postponing looking at other systems. There will probably come a day where I feel like, I need to like get some inspiration and look around, and I will keep that in mind for then. Vivid Active IT says, Hi Andreas, how are you doing today? I am doing fine, thank you. How are you? Can SerenityOS be booted on any x86 machine from a USB key? That is unlikely to work. We don't have a stable or mature USB stack, and we also have limited support for boot methods, so we don't support UEFI boot yet, for example. But if you can run grub on something, then you can probably boot Serenity as long as it is from physical media that can emulate one of our supported hard drive interfaces. So it's unlikely to work on like a random machine at this point. So Esseler says, Dear Andreas, is there a way to use Windows or Linux drivers for the driver in SerenityOS? No, not really. Krishna says, Hey Andreas, are you having any idea on releasing the old versions of SerenityOS, like creating a new branch in SerenityOS GitHub repo and uploading it? I don't know what would be the point of that. If you want to see older versions of SerenityOS, you can just go back in the Git history, check out some revision that you're interested in, and just build that one. Let's see. Tobias says, is there a specific reason to have hex82 as the argument to int? So I think, what was the reason? The reason was that Linux was using hex80, I think. And originally I also used hex80 because I looked at like the way I figured out what the syscall interface should look like originally was that I looked at an example of like how would you write raw assembly on Linux, and I saw that okay, so they're setting up the arguments and then calling int80, and I thought okay, I guess we can use int80 too, but or int80 0, we can use it as well, not 82. But when I did that, and then at some point I accidentally tried to run a Serenity binary on Linux, and because it was using int80, it was just calling random syscalls, and it made things very confused. So I decided that I'm just going to use a slightly different number than Linux, so that if I accidentally run a Serenity binary on Linux, it will fail instead of run some random syscall as my user account. Because, you know, that seemed unnecessarily dangerous. Let's see. Anurag says how to implement a custom syscall. So the way you add system calls to Serenity is in the kernel API syscall. So Serenity kernel API syscall. And here we have a list of all the syscalls. So this is the sort of the canonical authority on what our system calls are. And as you can see, they are in alphabetical order. You find we have quite a lot of them nowadays. So if you wanted to add one that was called, you said you wanted to add a custom syscall. So let's imagine that you would add a system call called custom. What you would do here is just add it here. So custom call. And then you also need to specify whether or not the system call you're adding needs to take the big process lock. And this is sort of a temporary situation while we're trying to get rid of the big process lock. And the big process lock is a mechanism that prevents other threads from within the same process from executing kernel code at the same time as this syscall is going on. So because the kernel was originally built with a big process lock, there are many parts in the kernel that sort of assume that you will never have concurrent execution of two threads within the same process. And there are various dangerous races that can occur if you actually do run two threads from the same process in the kernel at the same time. So we are gradually sort of fixing these issues, but until those are all fixed and we get rid of the big process lock, you have to specify whether or not a new system call needs it. So for a new system call, ideally you would write it in a completely non-racy way, so you wouldn't need the big process lock. Once you have added the system call here, what you do is you go and add it to process.h as well. So all system calls in the kernel get turned into member function calls on the current process class. So here you would add, they all have this signature. So this one would be called syscustom, or was it system custom call actually? Yeah, custom call. So you just make a corresponding thing here, and you can take any number of arguments that you want. This is one of the more relaxed areas when it comes to type safety in the kernel. So you can see here that they take different sets of arguments. So say that you wanted to pass in two integers, right? Int A and int B. And now you have this thing, so we have to implement that, and we can put that. System calls are actually spread across many files because there are so many different system calls. So let's just put this one in the main process CPP. So it would end up looking something like this, process. And then maybe we will just, I don't know, add them together, right? So it's a it's a system call for computing the sum of two integers. So there we have that, and now we want to actually call this thing from user space. So let's make a new user space program just for the heck of it. We'll call it ksum for kernel sum. This is going to be super useful. So this would look something like this. So since there isn't a C library wrapper or anything for this, we're going to have to use the syscall API directly. So we'll have to do this, and we call sc, it's called custom call. And then we pass in two integers, like 2 and 3, and hopefully this should produce a, actually let me use outline. This should hopefully produce a 5. Otherwise we have to also do some debugging here. So let's see. That's not what I wanted. I wanted this guy. Oh, yeah, and then it takes a moment to rebuild, because whenever you add system calls, then you're kind of messing with a lot of dependencies, because a lot of things depend on the syscall IDs. And it can actually, that's a small gotcha there, but it's like the order here matters. So when I add a system call here, it actually breaks the kernel ABI. So if you have ports compiled, for example, they may need a rebuild if they were doing system calls directly. But anyway, let's see. Oh, that's going to take a moment to build, I guess. So although nowadays this is less of an issue, because most system calls are done in libc, and I don't think any ports actually do direct system calls. It was a much bigger issue when we were statically linking our ports, but nowadays we used shared libraries, so it's okay to break the kernel syscall ABI as long as people are using libc. So here we go. ksum prints out 5. That was a quick tour of how to add a system call. So let's see. Miyoyo says, hello there, Andreas. Can you do an overview of how the test macro shown off in the last update video works? Right, so you were talking about our new try macro. And oh, this is in, well, so we're using it both in libjs for JavaScript stuff and in the kernel. So I was poking around the kernel, adding it to a whole bunch of things. Let's take a look at how it works. So when you use try like this, then it expands to this whole thing here. And what this is a GCC and Clang extension that allows you to do control flow within an expression. So let's see if we can, if I can show you here. So one problem is that, say that you wanted to do foo or error is get foo, and then if foo or error is error, return foo or error. Otherwise, foo is foo or error release value. So for this to turn into this beautiful thing here, we really want the try to behave as an expression that actually returns the released value once we have confirmed that no error occurred. And in order to do that, you can't normally, like in standard C++, you can't return from within an expression. So because we want to assign the result of try to a variable, I mean, there's no way to return within that expression. But thanks to this expression statement, I think it's called, extension to GCC, statement expressions, no, what's it called? I think this is the thing. Statement expr. So this thing allows you to do control flow in here. So you can actually return, and then you don't end up assigning anything to the path, and it just works the way you would want it. So that's how that works. And it is really, really handy, and a lot less verbose than what we were doing before. And I've learned that there are some other libraries that also do exactly the same trick as we do. So it seems like we're on a good track with that. But as I mentioned in the update video yesterday, I would love it if C++ had a sort of a native way to express this pattern. But since it doesn't, then using a compiler extension seems reasonable. S. Seller says, how do you plan driver development in the Serenity operating system? I don't have a plan. Bellrise says, hello there, happy to catch you streaming. Hello there, Bellrise. Happy to catch you visiting. Dimitri is right that the answer is I have no plan. Ecoptics says, was K-result inspired by Rust's result? No. Ria says, how much effort would it take for someone to port Webkit to Serenity, given you worked on its development before? I have no idea, but it could definitely be done, but it's not something I'm interested in. I've already put more than half a decade of my life, almost a whole decade of my life into Webkit. I have no interest in like going back into that. And I think what we're doing is it's significantly more interesting and more beautiful. So yeah. F Society 00 says, is Vim ported? Yes, we do have a Vim port, although I haven't tested it myself recently. Let's try to build it. We don't build with Ninja. I have some dependencies that we have to fix. Let's see. Ecoptic says, is there a part of the system that you are not familiar with, don't know a lot about if someone asks you a question? Well, I'm familiar with all the parts of the system, sure, but I'm not an expert on all the parts, which I think is awesome. So there are definitely parts where I would defer to other people. But there isn't anything in the system where I would feel paralyzed and unable to figure out how something works. It's just that I'm definitely not the main expert on things. And I'm really, really happy that we got to the point where other people are the expert on certain things, not me. Let's see. So it seems that our ncurses does not build because of what is this, wide character support related. So maybe we have a little bit of port breakage, or maybe my tool chain is outdated or something. I don't know. But let's not dig into that now. F Society says, thoughts on Plan 9? I have not used Plan 9 enough to have an opinion that matters. Drizzt says, system call demo was neat. Well, great. I hope that clarified how to add a system call. The main thing to do next is to just look at existing system calls and see how they work. And if you want to learn more about the kernel, a great way to do that is just take a system call that you understand from a user space perspective, like open, for example. Like you understand what open is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to open this path for writing or reading or whatever, and give you back a file descriptor. And with only that knowledge, you can go and look at the implementation of the open syscall, and you should be able to work out how it achieves that. That the reason I say that is to the people who are asking, like, where should I start looking? Like that's one way that you can start looking at something like that. Drizzt says, something I wonder, for exception handling, do you need anything inside kernel or libraries, or is it all inside output binary? We do not use C++ exceptions in Serenity, so that's not really relevant, although we do have some support for them because it's required for some of our third-party ports, but we do not use it ourselves. Cheyenne says, does Serenity use SDL2 for its GUI, or you wrote it manually? Yes, everything we here is manually homemade. We do not use SDL or any such thing. This is written from scratch. But I did use SDL years ago to prototype the GUI originally. Dean says, hey Andreas, first time catching you live. Came across one of your videos a few months ago and it inspired me to get into OS development myself. Fantastic. I am happy to hear that, Dean. I think operating system development is a very fun hobby for those who get into it, because it is one of the types of programming where you have just complete freedom, right? Which is both a great and a spooky thing, because you can learn so much by being by yourself in an environment with no debugger, no video drivers, no nothing, and you have to figure everything out step by step. It changes a programmer, I think, to do OS development. But it is also pretty cumbersome if you're not used to that type of environment. So I hope that you're having fun with it. Let's see. Ecoptic says, "What did you do on Webkit?" Oh my goodness, I did so much, so much random stuff on Webkit. But for the last couple of years, I worked in what was called the performance team, and then I also worked in the architecture team. So most of my time was spent in the performance team, where I was responsible for memory usage. So I was doing memory usage optimizations in the JavaScript engine and in the CSS layout engines, in the whole thing, trying to make sure that Safari and WebKit was using less memory than every other browser. And we had benchmarks for that and stuff. So I was just living day to day trying to improve benchmarks. And that was very rewarding work. And in retrospect, I see that by engaging in performance work on such a huge project, it forced me to go everywhere. Like many of my coworkers who had a different specialization, they ended up with like staying in a smaller area most of the time. But if you're working on performance, you can stay in your small area, but if the performance problem is caused by a JPEG decoder having a stupid algorithm or something like that, then you're just going to have to go and fix the JPEG decoder or whatever else is causing the problem. And then I did that for many years, and it's definitely a big part of how I built up my ability to work on all kinds of problems. It's that I come from this many-year background in trying to improve performance across browsers, both on macOS and iOS. Let's see. Xar512 says, "This is your OS, right?" Well, I started the project, so I've written the most of the code, certainly most of the commits, but it is not really my OS anymore, because at this point we have more than 500 people who have joined me and have added their own changes to it. So I wouldn't say that it's my OS. It's just I am the original author of this OS, but this is now our OS. Sean Connolly says, "When are we going to see you on a Lex Fridman podcast?" I have no idea. I do not know Lex Fridman, but maybe one day. Let's see. Error XP7 says, "Have you ever used another Linux distro other than Ubuntu Mate?" Sure, I have used many Linux distros like Slackware, Debian, SUSE, Red Hat, Fedora, Gentoo, Crux, Arch, very briefly Arch, I should say, before people get rabid and excited. But I have used very many Linux distributions and many BSD variants and stuff. And also non-free Unixes like Solaris and other non-free Unixes. And I've enjoyed all of it, but I think something I realized many years ago about Linux in particular is that there isn't really that much meaningful difference between the distributions, and outside of like tinkering with distribution specific stuff, it makes no difference to me which distribution I use. So I just use Ubuntu Mate because I want to use the Mate desktop because it's simple and looks okay. Surav says, "OS dev is fun because it's hard. By doing hard things, it brings confidence in life. Still trying to be calm like you." That is really true. By doing hard things, it brings confidence in life. Really, I really agree with that. One of the greatest things that you can do in your life and with your spare time in particular is difficult things that you enjoy. Pick difficult hobbies and try to get good at them. It is so much more rewarding than picking easy hobbies. see. Christian says, hey, Kling, any issues available for Hacktoberfest? So I don't know specifically, but we don't really treat Hacktoberfest any different than any other day. So please just do what you would normally do. Don't do anything different for Hacktoberfest. I would say that to people who feel that they really, really need to get a Hacktoberfest t-shirt or whatever, please don't make nonsense pull requests with tiny pointless changes. If you can avoid it, try to do something useful instead, because the spirit of Hacktoberfest, at least as I understand it, is that you're supposed to make meaningful contributions, not just make a certain quantity of contributions to get a t-shirt. Now, I'm not saying that to you specifically, that you're here, that you're interested in a t-shirt. It's just last year in particular, we saw on the whole web, we saw these people just trying so hard to get t-shirts, and it got a little bit weird. So I would just say, please just do what you would normally do. Fix something that bothers you, improve something that you think could be better, and I'm sure that you will have a great Hacktoberfest. Essalur says, there, Andreas, there are monolith and microservices approaches in kernel programming. What path do you follow? What are the advantages and disadvantages? SerenityOS uses a monolithic kernel because it is the path that I chose. I tried writing a microkernel originally, but I found it really cumbersome and boring, and I realized that if I'm going to write a microkernel, then I will never make progress on this operating system, and we wouldn't be here today. So I just stopped trying to do that and started doing a monolithic kernel instead, started having a lot of fun, and that's where the project came from. As for technical advantages and disadvantages, I don't really care. Drist Duerden says, and for now, for me, WebKit high memory usage is why I don't use WebKit. It looks like they didn't find someone to take your place at WebKit. So I know that there are people working on memory usage in WebKit, but it is an extremely difficult problem at the level of sophistication of something like WebKit or Blink or Gecko. So when you see high memory usage, it's not like people don't understand that these problems exist. It's just that it's very hard to cover all the cases, and I think maybe when I worked on it, I was more obsessed about that specifically than anybody has been since then. So perhaps it is not entirely inaccurate that they care less about it today than when I was doing it, because I was really obsessed with it. But it is a really difficult thing to get right, and something that often gets in the way of memory usage problems is the fact that the web content itself can cause huge amounts of memory usage, and the engines don't really have a choice but to sort of allow the content, because if the web content decides to create millions of JavaScript objects, it's not like the browser engine can just say like, oh, I'm not going to let you do that. It has to actually create those millions of objects, or the web page won't behave correctly. So browser memory usage is this interesting problem where you have to constantly try to reduce the size of common objects, because there are pages that just allocate tons of them. And you have to try to figure out ways to throw away stuff that you can rebuild in case you need it later and things like that. But whatever you do, there's always this minimum set of things that the content forces you to keep alive. And I always thought that was a really interesting problem to work on, because you can't escape the sort of the minimum working set of the page. Anyway, that's something that I find still fun to this day, and I'm partly looking forward to when we have these types of problems in Serenity, and also partly dreading it because I know how hard they can be to track down. But at least nowadays I have a much better clue of what kind of tools I would like to build, and for these types of problems specifically, and I'm in a much better position to build those tools while the engine is still very malleable, and like there are less moving parts to worry about. Anyway, let's see. Xar512 says, can I start like this? I mean the tutorial in this GitHub. I don't know what that means. There is no tutorial in this GitHub. Isaltino says, can you do an overview of how HTML is displayed on screen? Sure. Yeah, so the way that we do that is it's a multi-step process. Let's see what we can use to explain. Let's use Vim. So imagine that we have a bunch of content, right? So I'm just gonna make some crappy thing here. Let's do something like that. Foo and bar. What we do here is first thing we do, of course, is parse the HTML and turn it into a DOM tree. So it becomes this tree of C++ objects that looks like this. I think element, HTML body element, HTML div element, and then it has a text node that says foo. It has a sibling here called div element, text node that says bar. And yeah, so the string text input is first transformed into a C++ object tree called the DOM, the document object model. And then in order to display this on screen, what you have to do next is you have to take whatever CSS applies. So even if you don't have any style tag in the HTML input, right? The browser still provides a set of default CSS. So in our case, that's a file called default.css. This is the default style sheet that is applied to all content, and it is applied at a lower priority than any CSS on the web, but it's sort of the baseline look of HTML in our browser. So we apply all the CSS, and the way we do that is we iterate through each of these elements here and check which CSS selectors apply to them. So for example, if I were to, we have to start at the root, so the HTML element. We would look for anything that matches that. Look, this thing here matches. So then we learn that we have to apply these two things to that thing. So we start to build up sort of what we call specified style, which is the set of CSS properties that apply to an element. So specified style, we start building this thing up. So we get these, and then we have to look through like more of the selectors. Maybe there are other things here that match, like, oh look, it's part of this one right here, so we have to apply this. It's the display block, and so on. And you have to, this would take a very, very long time to go through manually, but basically we work out the set of CSS properties that apply and resolve the final one that should be used. And then once we have done that for this element, we go through the next element and the next element. And once we have the relevant style for everybody in the tree, we do this process that we call building a layout tree, because you can't really lay out a DOM tree by itself. Instead, you want to create a separate tree called a layout tree that combines the DOM with the style information that we got from CSS. And the key property that is the most important when you're creating this layout tree is the display property, because the display property determines what type of layout tree node each of these will sort of be represented by in the layout tree. So I'm not going to do this correctly now, but I think it would turn into something like this. So a block box corresponding to the HTML element, and then a block box corresponding to the body, who would have children like this for the div. And then for text, text doesn't have CSS applying to it, right, in web content, because text is different from elements. So text nodes, instead of getting a layout node like this, what happens is when we iterate through text nodes, we create little text fragments. So we take the text from here and find the containing block element. So in this case, it's like we would have this thing here called a text node that would have the text foo. And what that does is it contributes this thing here as a piece of text that goes into this block box. So fragments would contain foo, and say that we actually fulu, then we would have a bit more of this. So we can look at this. And that's sort of the general gist of it. And there's a lot of complexity to this, of course, and different rules that apply. But once you have done this thing, then grossly simplified, the way that you paint it is that you just start from the root and recursively paint each thing, and followed by painting its children. And painting is done in a set of phases. So first, I think you paint the background of every element first, recursively from the root, and then you paint the borders, and then you paint the foreground and text, and so on. This is really, really a topic that would require sort of a bit more preparation, I think, to explain fully. But one thing that's really nice about building a browser engine is that it's heavily specified. So the HTML and CSS specifications describe in great detail how all of this needs to work. Now, they don't tell you how to write a browser in C++, right? Or in any language. They describe things in this abstract spec language. But once you get familiar with that, you'll be able to turn that into code in your language of choice. So that's sort of a very, very quick overview on that. And I skipped over a lot of things. So this is by no means the definitive explanation of how this works. There's a lot of like tens of steps in between everything that I said. But if you're interested in working on browser layout rendering or anything like that, then we do have an active browser development community within the SerenityOS community. And come talk about it on Discord if you wanna do that. So let's see. Drist says, in Serenity, Unicode handling is ANSI C or UTF-8. If UTF-8, was there anything unexpected when coding? Probably you will just say, look at code. Sorry for being lazy. Well, I encourage you to look at the code. And there wasn't anything unexpected when implementing UTF-8. I guess I was a little bit naive in the beginning because I thought that I was just writing this for myself, and I did not originally think that other people would join me. So because I only use English myself, I thought like, oh, I don't care about supporting anything. I'll just make a completely ASCII operating system, right? And that ended up having to backtrack on that, and we're still feeling some of the sour effects of me starting with an ASCII only mindset. But that wasn't really surprising. The thing that was surprising was that other people wanted to participate. Let's see. German WTB says, never making progress on a microkernel. Hurt feelings. Haha. Mahmoud says, we need a maintainer interested in libsql. Yeah, I suppose so. But we need, I think with libsql, the problem is that libsql is sort of siloed at the moment. And it's lovely that there are people interested in working on it, but I think it would attract a lot more people to participate and help out if libsql had some kind of integration with the rest of the system. Like if there would be some client of libsql. For the people working on libsql, I would encourage you to try to integrate it with something else so that we can get sort of I guess like a logical intersection point between libsql and the rest of the system where people can see it and get familiar with it. SLR says, why are operating systems like Windows or Mac OS really so bloated? I don't know. It really depends on your definition of bloated, and everybody has a different definition of that, so there isn't really a straight answer. But the generic answer is because they have more features than you need. And that's always going to happen when you have a general purpose software targeting consumers, right? Because there are just so many different things that they need to support that the vast majority of the features that your general purpose operating system is capable of are not relevant or interesting to you, but they're still there because they're part of the system. So that's one advantage that we have, is that we're not a general purpose operating system. We're a operating system made for ourselves. So we don't have to suffer from the bloating effects of features that like consumers might care about, or people who are not working on the system might care about. Of course, the great flaw with that mentality is that if the system should happen to become so popular that there are so many people working on it and they all want these features that I don't care about, it will still become bloated. But I kind of think that we are niche enough that is not a risk. But who knows? Jim and WTV says, any feeling about the HTML, SGML versus XHTML conflict? Is this 1999? Because I don't know that anybody cares about that anymore. I don't have any strong feelings anymore. Let's see. Diego says, I don't know much about C++, but I liked Serenity. How can I start contributing to the project? The best way to do that is to do what I always suggest, which is to use the system. So build the system, try it out, mess around, and you will eventually come across something that bothers you, something that's broken or ugly or could be better in some way. And then you start from there and try to figure out, what can I do to make this better, right? And that's what I suggest this to everybody, because I want everybody to have a personal connection point where they enter the system, instead of like following a formula of me saying like, oh, start here and then go there. It's much better if everybody just starts from a place of curiosity. So just mess around until you find something that you don't like. I promise you that you will, because we have many bugs. And then let's talk about how you can fix that. Let's see. Dean says, thanks for the response. Definitely enjoying my time in the OS dev world. It is a really interesting space to work in, and the satisfaction of creating something from the ground up. I agree. The satisfaction of creating something from the ground up is fantastic. And it goes well with the thing that we were also saying about how you pick difficult things to do, right? Pick a difficult hobby and do your best at it. Cheater World says, what is your current goal with Serenity? I do not really have goals or plans, but my long-term goal is to build a system that I want to use so that I can stop using other systems and use Serenity. But I don't have like a plan for how to achieve that. I'm just going to do it. Let's see, Milos says, what is the best way for someone to learn basic OS concepts such as concurrency, memory, I/O, etc.? Well, I don't know actually what would be the best way, But I imagine that an adequate way would be to write programs. If you want to learn about concurrency, you don't have to write an operating system. You can write a multi-threaded program that does something concurrently. If you want to learn about memory, you can write a memory allocator, like write your own malloc, right? You don't have to build an operating system just to do these things. And I think doing sort of little sandboxed versions of operating system primitives in the comfort of a user space environment can be a really, really good exercise if you want to learn about these concepts. Like implementing a memory allocator, for example, is something I would recommend to anybody who is interested in low-level programming, because it just teaches you so much. And by implementing a memory allocator, you will understand a lot more about low-level programming in general, and you will also understand why your memory allocator behaves the way that it does sometimes. And it's also one of those things that has a huge amount of research behind it, and once you understand the fundamentals of memory allocation, all that research becomes much more accessible to you, and it's quite interesting to read about like how other people approach it, what are the different ideas and fads and so on in memory allocation. When it comes to I/O, that's a little bit trickier because you can't really do I/O outside of that's not true. You can do stuff like Arduino programming or GPIO programming, but I don't think I/O is particularly hard to understand. So I don't think you would need to spend a lot of time on it. The best way, though, to learn any basic concept is to just write code that exercises that concept. Chris Turkle says, this might be an FAQ, but where did the idea of the Ladybug as mascot come from? So there are many different backstories, but one that I like is that we have bugs as mascots because we embrace the fact that software has bugs, and that software development is in large part about managing and dealing with bugs. Much like if you go on our Discord server, you will see people posting yaks left and right, because we also embrace the yak as a lifestyle. I think that's sort of one explanation for where it comes from. Like I like the idea that software is about bugs, and software has bugs, and being a programmer is about fixing bugs and trying to not create too many of them, but they're always going to be there. So that's sort of our mascot. Let's see. Omega Killer says, thank you for being an inspiration for most of us. Well, you're welcome, I guess. I'm really glad if you feel inspired. And for most of us, like, that makes me think of the people who are not inspired. But I mean, obviously this is not inspiring to everybody, but if what I do can inspire somebody to do something that they end up liking or that they end up finding really interesting, I'm super happy. So thank you for saying that. Hi Dow says, from the video, let's port Diablo to SerenityOS, made me aware of this project. Love this. Yeah, that was one of my most popular videos, I think. A lot of people learned about the project from that. And it almost got so popular that I got a little bit stressed out, to be honest, because there were so many new people coming to the channel for a few weeks after I posted that. I think I would even say I got a little bit scared because there were so many people, but I got over it since then, and I'm really glad that all the people found the project and ended up liking it, and many people ended up working on it. So I'm glad you're here. Hi Dow. Gokul says, is it possible to build a kernel with C++? Of course. S. Salur says, where do you want to see Serenity in the future? On my computer, basically. Let's see. John says, hi, Andreas. I felt inspired by Serenity and wrote so much code my hands hurt. Any tips for managing or preventing keyboard-related injury? I'm not really the right person to ask about that, unfortunately, because I have not experienced that type of issue. So maybe I'm doing something that prevents it successfully. That's why I haven't experienced it, or maybe I'm just lucky, but I don't know that I have any particularly good advice, I'm afraid. Ecoptic says, I've seen malloc implementations and they look very intimidating and big. Right, so mature malloc implementations will look intimidating and big because they tend to have sophisticated optimizations like caches and also security mitigations, because the memory allocator is very often a target for exploit writers, for example. Like if they get control of your program maliciously, then they usually want to target the memory allocator if possible in order to steer the execution in some bad way. So because of that, and because also of how frequent of an operation allocation is, mature allocators tend to have lots of performance code and lots of security code. But you don't have to look at mature malloc implementation. There are plenty of simple ones, and you can also write one just from first principles, really. If I give you 3 or 2 primitives, really, if you just have mmap and munmap, these 2 system calls, you can write a memory allocator. And in fact, you can even write one without mmap and munmap. You can write a statically sized memory allocator. Say that you have an allocator that's just based around a 1 megabyte static byte array, right? You can write a malloc and free function pair that allocates out of that byte array and frees into that byte array. And it doesn't have to be fancy. I think starting with something really unfancy and really simple is really the best way to approach stuff like this, because by building miniatures, you start the construction of a mental model that will eventually be able to support an understanding of a more mature implementation. But it's so much harder to understand a mature allocator if you've never written a really simple allocator. Let's see. Alex Gravener says, no deep question for me this week. Hope you have a nice weekend. Well, I hope you have a nice weekend too. No deep questions, huh? Mustafa. Hello, Mustafa. How's it going? Sami says, when will SerenityOS have a chat channel in an open platform again? We have many chat channels on Discord, and I encourage people to use that. And I am not one of those people who sees inherent value in like using inferior software just because. So we use something that works really well, and that's what we're doing. Mustafa says, I just coded a symbolic math library yesterday for pretty much the only reason because somebody said you couldn't do it. That's crazy. I thought you would approve. I do approve. It's silly, like, because on one hand, you shouldn't let other people steer your emotions one way or the other. But on the other hand, when somebody insists that something is impossible and you know in your heart that you can do it, it's so hard to resist sometimes. And I've definitely fallen for this more than once in my life. But you know, if I see what you're doing, I'm not going to fall for it, but probably. But yes, I do approve. SLR says, will you try new approaches to the user interface? I don't know what that means. Will I try new approaches? We are doing some new things in the interface regularly, but part of the system Spirit is to rely on well-tested, well-understood abstractions and not do new things for the sake of doing new things. So what we do instead with Serenity is we mix approaches from different systems that work really well in isolation, and we try to combine them, perhaps. But new for the sake of new is not something I'm interested in. Drizzt says, is it possible to use Valgrind in a way with Serenity? Just favorite tool, and I can't imagine how to code without it. Well, so I love Valgrind as well. And I also love it when I say Valgrind and inevitably somebody shows up and tells me that I'm pronouncing it wrong. But yes, I love Valgrind. And that's why I started building a Valgrind-like tool for Serenity. So we have one. It's called User Space Emulator. And it works much the same way as Valgrind does, is that it creates an emulated CPU that executes the program. And because it emulates every instruction, we're able to insert instrumentation of memory allocations, accesses, and stuff like that. So it's called UE, User Space Emulator. And here is an example of running the ID program in UE, and it discovers that we had no leaks on exit. And if you do an invalid memory access, or you leak some memory, or use uninitialized data, stuff like that, UE can catch it. And it's a large, pretty large subproject of the Serenity project that comprises a x86, 32-bit x86 emulator that is able to run Serenity programs in a completely emulated environment. And it doesn't have all of the awesome features of Valgrind, of course, but it has many of them. Let's see. Gokul says, why did you decide to make it look like Windows 98? I didn't necessarily decide to make it look like Windows 98. I decided to be heavily inspired by the Windows classic look from Windows XP, if you want to be very specific about it. And it's because I think it is the most beautiful computer interface that has ever been. And it had some parts of it that were not perfect. So I thought, why don't we start from that and then try to make it even better and make it perfect? And it's not perfect yet, but I think what we're doing is we're taking the good stuff from that period and that sort of paradigm and improving them, trying to improve them with the knowledge and technology that we have accumulated since then. Let's see, Mustafa says that we have a user space emulator. That's absolutely right. Peter says, I'm not able to imagine what is the future of SerenityOS in 10 years. I have no idea. We'll find out. Maybe... Maybe everybody will leave and it will just be me sitting here once again messing around. But that's certainly not the way things are trending, so God knows. I mean, we've accomplished so much just in the last year that it's hard to extrapolate what we could do in 10 years. But there are so many factors, right? It depends on interest, like people being interested and curious and feeling the good vibes. And we are certainly blessed with good vibes at the moment. So I hope we continue to ride that good vibe wave, hopefully for another 10 years. Matrix says, is Serenity's kernel monolithic? Yes. S. Seller says, how do you decide to add features? I don't have a plan. I don't have any plan or any particular decision-making process for features. People work on the things that they are interested in, and people add things that they think would be really good. And if I agree that they would be good, if they seem like good things, then we add them. Sometimes people want to add things that are not good, or things that are not useful, or things that are ugly, for example. They want to make the system look worse. Then I tell them that we're not going to do that because it would make the system look worse. John says, but my freedoms. Right. That is a That is a caricature, obviously, but there's some truth to that, in that there's a weird extremist type of person who insists that everything has to be free and open, and I am not that person. Armo says, "Afternoon, Serenity people. Hello, Andreas." Hello, Armo. Nice to see you here. Let's see. Sami says, "When will Discord have a client for SerenityOS?" The browser is the Discord client for SerenityOS. Now, it doesn't actually work with Discord yet, but Discord works in any modern, sophisticated enough browser. So that is one of our things that we need to get going eventually. Drist says, "Just Valgrind for me, like memcheck, callgrind, hellgrind, sum of all tools." Right. So we basically, what we do have is memcheck and callgrind. We don't have the full range of functionality of memcheck and callgrind, but those are the two baseline tools that we have built into user space emulator. We don't have anything like hellgrind, so that could be an interesting area to expand. Vivid Active IT says, "How do you ensure system stability as it develops? Do you run a bunch of tests through a CI manager after each commit?" Yes, we have continuous integration tests that run on every pull request and also on every push to master. So, and we keep adding more and more tests. And we also do, we run the JavaScript test suite, the official ECMA 262 test suite called Test 262. Is run here. We have the thing for that. So the greener is better. So as you can see over time here, since early June, we have been increasing in our amounts of green. Very, very good. But that's just a JavaScript engine. On our GitHub, you will also see that we currently have a flaky CI, so we do see a lot of failures, but we do run on every push and every PR. So there are some known issues with the CI that I think there's some kernel bug that shows up a little too often that we need to track down that keeps failing runs. But yes, we run a I'm not going to say that it's a comprehensive test suite, but it is a growing and improving test suite of hundreds and hundreds of tests on every push. Abhishek says, "Hey Andreas, how are you doing?" I'm doing great. How are you? Let's see. Vasya says, "Hi Andreas, I've been enjoying your streams a lot. Thank you. It would be cool to have some more code review videos. The URL parser one was great, but that was 4 months ago." Sure, that would be fun. I should make more code review videos for sure. Let's see. Chris says, "In 10 years, I'll be using SerenityOS to write a novel on Google Docs. Hopefully way sooner." Yeah, why not? I think Luke was showing Google Docs in the browser earlier today, and it was very broken. But it did kind of load. Actually, maybe you have to have a Google Docs URL for that to work. Let me see if I can... Google Docs. I'm just looking for some Google Doc that I could use. I don't know how to get that actually. Well, anyway, it's one of those things that we can keep iterating on the browser, and as long as Google doesn't get totally crazy and start doing stuff that only works in Chrome, which they totally might, but as long as they don't go completely crazy, we will eventually be able to run Google Docs, right? And most other things on the web. So I think it will probably be sooner than 10 years. Benoit says, what is the lowest level feature / tool you developed for Serenity? Is it the kernel? Yes, I guess so. Probably the kernel. I don't know what would be lower than that. Abhishek says, hey Andreas, are you working on any other personal projects as well aside from Serenity? No, not really. I don't have any other projects that I'm working on. I have other things that I do, like I have personal activities like playing video games and lifting weights, but I don't do any other personal projects. And Rio with the super chat, thank you very, very much. He says, thanks for being you. And there's a very cute pair looking at himself in a mirror. Thank you very much for the super chat, Rio. Mustafa says, how does the Hacktoberfest thing work? Do I just make some PRs for merch? So I think the way it works is that you have to have pull requests accepted by projects that are participating in Hacktoberfest. And because people have been requesting it, I went ahead and marked us as a Hacktoberfest participating project. So we have this tag here. So if you have 4 pull requests get accepted into the project and merged, my understanding is that you can either get the famous t-shirt, or you can also choose to donate the equivalent amount to planting a tree somewhere or something like that. Personally, I am not going to get the t-shirt. I have instead ordered, I can't type while I speak apparently. I have ordered one of these t-shirts for this October. The Yaktoberfest 2021. So I'm still waiting for that because the Swedish customs, they always stop my t-shirts. So I had to pay a customs fee, but hopefully getting it soon. But I certainly encourage people to participate in Hacktoberfest if you really, really want that t-shirt. Your PRs in Serenity will qualify towards that. Anishnu says, you have such a calm voice, man. Thank you, I guess. I try to be calm, and I'm really glad if that's reflected in my voice. So Firefox is asking, which t-shirt am I wearing now? This is turning into a merch shilling stream. Right now I'm wearing this one, the SerenityOS Ladybug. It is a very, very lovely shirt, I must say. Let's see. So Mustafa says that Serenity is like a few dozen projects in itself. Yeah, that is true. We definitely have a wider scope than 99% of projects, I think, maybe even more than that. And that is a lot of fun. And I think originally there were many people who said that this is not going to work and you have to divide it into many smaller projects and things like that. But clearly it does work. It works for us, and we are making progress still, and things are going well. So I'm very, very happy that I stuck to my guns on this, and that we've been sticking to our guns on the mono repo thing, the single project, everything under one roof, because every day almost there's somebody, or definitely every day there's somebody discovering how nice it is that this thing that they're working on, all the code for it is right here. That's one of those things I just love seeing or witnessing, when somebody on Discord who's new to the project and they're hacking on something and they discover that all the code that affects them is right within the code base. That always makes me feel so happy. Let's see. So Colin says, regarding fonts, are you considering subpixel addressing, like font smoothing in Serenity? So that's absolutely something that we want to do. But I don't have a plan, as I always say, for anything in particular. But at the moment, our TrueType or OpenType font renderer does not do... it doesn't do a couple of things that would dramatically improve rendering quality. So we don't have subpixel hinting, and we don't have kerning, and there are a bunch of like composite glyph things that we just kind of ignore, like this, I forget what it's called, like composite glyph attributes or something like that, and some parts of that they will require some font engine refactoring in order to support, because the coordinate systems that we're using for some parts are not the coordinate systems that we need to be in order to do the kerning correctly and stuff like that. But that's just one of those things where we need to sit down and hack on it. And I did a little bit of hacking on the font engine a while back, but I have some other stuff that I'm mostly interested in right now, so I'm focusing on that, and eventually I will become interested in the font stuff again and work on that. That's sort of how everything develops here. And of course, if somebody else is interested in that in the meantime, then they are encouraged to pick it up and just hack on it. The font stuff that I'm talking about is in the libgraphics TT TrueType font directory. And a lot of the code that needs work is in the glyph class and the glyph CPP. That's where we have the anti-aliasing glyph rasterizer, for example. Anyway, let's see. So Vivid Active IT says, you seem to have an almost unshakable focus on this project. Do you ever wonder, what if you did work on something else, or is SerenityOS what makes the most sense to work on in the world for you? Right. That is exactly how I feel. It makes sense to me to put my time and effort into this because I started this project when I was very, very lost, and I didn't know what to do with my life, and I just needed something to hold on to. And it has become sort of my anchor point in life. And the fact that I am able to do this full time, thanks to the very generous support of people like yourself and people around the web who like the system and who like what I do, it is absolutely amazing. And I can't imagine doing anything else anytime soon. And I'm just really grateful to be in this position, because this whole project has basically given me a life that I enjoy. And something that's even nicer about it is that it gives other people so much enjoyment as well. Essalur says, today this situation has started to appear. Gaming OS or business OS? Which way will Serenity take? Neither. Serenity is not a gaming or business OS. It is a operating system for its own developers, whatever that means. Mr. Brax says that Swedish customs have gotten so annoying. I don't disagree with you. Actually, for anybody who lives in Sweden, if you buy anything from a foreign country, there's this thing that happens more and more recently, that customs will just intercept your package, whatever it is. They will open it, conclude that it's fine, and then attach a label to it that says you have to pay a fee. And you're basically paying them to look at your incoming packages and determine that there's nothing wrong with them. And I really feel like that's not super cool, but I also don't have a choice, because if I want my package, I have to pay. But yeah, I agree that that's annoying. Let's see. Nate Rush says, just wanted to pop in and say I love the monthly updates. It's so exciting to see how the system is progressing, and the fact that you pay attention to the entire system makes your care visible. I certainly care about the entire system. Yes, I think that's the way to build something like this. Is you need to, at least in my position as sort of the original author and the leader of the project, I have to care about every corner of the system, at least to some degree, because that's how I'm able to keep it moving forward in good directions, right? And I'm glad that you can see it. And certainly, if you ever see me looking like I don't care, then please tell me, because then something is probably wrong. I really love the project that we're doing here, and I love that there are so many people who participate and contribute. Everybody contributes their own care and attention to some part of it, and it just elevates the whole thing to the point where, like, the Serenity that exists today is not really something that this is not really something that one person could build in a reasonable time frame, because while you can certainly build sort of the outline and the architecture and structure of a system like this, the sheer amount of polish that has gone into it and keeps going into it is, to me, just something that is truly amazing, and it really elevates it above I guess what people would think of as like a toy or a hobby project or whatever. It's just so nice. Like this thing that I was showing in the monthly video that Marcus did, where views now scroll if you hold something droppable near the edge. I just love that. That's just so nice, and that's some serious type of polish. Also, now that I do that, it does make me wonder. Notice how the sort of the tentative drop target, it doesn't actually update while we're auto-scrolling. Maybe we should make it do that. Like, should the drop target keep updating while it's auto-scrolling based on the mouse cursor position relative to the new scroll offset? And what I'm saying right now is a great example of the type of polish that I just love seeing in the system, because I mean, polish is awesome, right? And the better, and the more you polish something, the better it gets. And the more you polish something, the more you start to notice these other little tweaks that could make it even better. So I think polish work has this great compounding effect where it opens up the door for new types of polish that just makes it even better. Anyway, that's something that we should dig into. Let's see. Nuruddin says, hi Andreas, I am very excited to be watching the live, as I never seem to catch time to do so. Thank you for all of your content. You are truly an inspiration to all of us. Good luck with SerenityOS. Thank you so much, Nuruddin. I'm glad to hear that. Liban says, hi Andreas, you began coding very young. Would you tell us something about your childhood projects? So sure, I started very young. My childhood projects were very silly often. If I try to remember the very, very early ones, like before I started going to elementary school, I was doing basic programs, and I wish I still had the code, but like it's been lost to time. But my recollection is that I did a lot of these sort of programs that would quiz you. They would sort of quiz you on answers that you needed to memorize, and they were just like simple basic programs. They would have like these question and answer, very ugly if statements, where you had to memorize something, or they would ask you math problems. I remember writing some tool to generate math problems for myself, and that sort of stuff. And I also had these ambitions, or these imaginary ambitions, that I wanted to make a game, but I never really did, because I wasn't actually interested in making the game. I just liked the idea of being a game developer. But then I got over that halfway through elementary school or something, which is interesting because like I meet people nowadays who are like my age, and they don't make games, but they wish they were a game developer. And I don't know, I guess some people hold on to that, but I kind of let go of that very early, and I realized that I didn't really want to make games. Anyway, Diego says, what's your workflow when you want to add a new feature? Do you discuss it first or implement it right away and discuss later with the contributors, for example? Usually, if I want to add a new feature, I just build it and see how it goes. And if it turns into a piece of crap, then I throw it away. If it turns into something great, then I keep it. And it really depends on the feature. It used to be that I was frequently adding new applications and new libraries to the system, and there's definitely less of that in recent times, because the system has gotten to the point where while it's by no means finished, it is my personal feeling that I want to work on improving the quality and sophistication of the set of libraries and applications that we have, rather than expanding into new areas right now. But that's not to say that I don't welcome other people doing that, although I don't know, like I like to think that we don't have a limited scope of the project. And there have been a few times where people try to take the project in some new directions that were interesting, but in each of those cases, the people trying to do that did not have sort of the persistence to actually make it happen. And I think that's okay. We can come back to things like that later on. There isn't a rush really to grow in any particular direction, at least not in my opinion. And I think that's something that's one of our strengths, is that we are not driven by sort of a corporate agenda or anything like that. And instead, we are just completely driven by people's interest and curiosity, and some people's obsession with whatever it is that they want to do. And it just makes the project so pleasant to participate in and be around. And the fact that everybody is working on the thing that they care about and not something that they think that they have to do, that they're supposed to do, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let's see. Mustafa with the super chat. Thank you, Mustafa. This is for saying nice things about my pixel paint changes in the update video. Oh man. Well, if I knew that I could get super chat by saying nice things in the update videos, just wait for the next one. I'm just kidding, by the way. NSG650 says, is there any work going on for hardware accelerated graphics? Not that I'm aware of, but I also don't know what everybody's doing, because there's so much chatter and communication going on that I can't follow every discussion. That used to be possible 2 years ago, but nowadays there are people coordinating and collaborating on all kinds of sub-projects in Serenity, and I can't keep track of all of it, so I don't know if anybody's doing that. German WTB says, when would be the point for you would want to buy a Raspberry Pi to play with the Pi support yourself? Well, I guess maybe one day I would do that. I'm not particularly interested in embedded things. Like I've had embedded jobs many times, and I've done a lot of embedded development, but it's not something I want to do in my free time, because I just I enjoy desktop development so much more, and all of the extra steps that you take around embedded development, they they just wear on me, and I don't like to deal with them. So if I don't have to, I'm not going to. George says, how important is security when developing for SerenityOS? Are there any set guidelines when it comes to security for those that want to contribute to the project? Well, it is something that we do take seriously. We have had a number of exploits against bugs in the system in the past, and I do run a bug bounty program, although I haven't had any people sending in any requests or any bugs recently, but I do have a bug bounty program on serenityos.org/bounty. It's been a while, but here you can see past exploits. So we've had a handful of them, and they had some interesting write-ups on how they were able to get root and stuff. And the system has a fair number of state-of-the-art security mitigations. We have pretty decent sandboxing, both of system calls and of the file system. And we implement many security mechanisms. And when it comes to like contributions, people are expected to do their best in writing secure code, obviously, but people make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but we try to like avoid mistakes. Certainly any mistakes that can be avoided at compile time, we encourage avoiding at compile time. And one thing that is a bit unusual compared to other projects, I guess I would say, is that we do have a tendency to use verify a lot, which is sort of like assert that you would see in other projects. But the difference is that verify is not compiled out in debug builds. So when you're not sure about something, it's good to trust, but verify. Basically what this does is that if the condition between the parentheses is not true, then we will crash the program. And we use this extensively in the project because it is my belief that it is better to crash than to continue in an invalid state and potentially do something that would harm you. So I guess that is the main thing that I would sort of inform people about. Like please use verify to verify that you're in a good state. And also, please don't add security bugs so that I have to pay the $5 bug bounty reward if you can avoid it. It would be fun to see some exploits. It's been so long since we had the last. When was the last one? The last one was start of this year in March. So what? That's like 7 months ago now. We're due for some new root exploits, I think. SLR says, Dear Andreas, thank you for your answers and your time. I follow you regularly and appreciate your path very much. Thank you, SLR. Swastik BS says, hey, I'm looking to develop embedded OS for STM32 for my final year project. Any suggestions? I don't know anything about STM32, and I don't have any particular suggestions, but I'm sure that you can find something on Google. Vedang says, does SerenityOS kernel support eBPF's features in terms of adding security and networking? No, we do not have a like Berkeley packet filter or anything like that. We don't have packet filtering at all. In fact, we have a very basic networking stack. Let's see. Vasya says, someone mentioned Plan 9. I suggest you check it out. Neat ideas about the IPC, UI, etc. Much is accomplished with little code. Sure, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of it. It's just, I have so many things I need to check out. It's just, Plan 9 is just one of many. Let's see, Vedang says, or can say how virtualization is written in the kernel. We don't have any particular virtualization support in our kernel. We support running as a virtual guest, so we have some integration with virt.io, for example, which are the virtualization specific emulated hardware things that QEMU provides. Drist says, from core libraries or kernel, is there something that bothers you that you would like to refactor for better if you had more time. Sure, lots of things, but I do have time, so I just refactor incrementally. If you were to follow my commits, which I don't necessarily recommend, but you would see that I tend to like run around the system every now and then and just refactor random things to try to improve them, make them more expressive, more clear. And it's something that I enjoy doing, and I feel like I have time for it. Let's see. Essler says, I couldn't explain my question about the GUI. Will it be like Android or Mac OS or a more innovative Quest? I don't know what that means. There is no plan. Alexandru says, hi, will you add features to Serenity on this live stream? No, this is a live stream that we do every Friday where it's just a questions and answers chat kind of live stream. And people just bring questions and we talk about them, basically technical or non-technical. Samuel Jones says, does it feel weird supporting other people on Patreon/GitHub while you are being sponsored full-time yourself? Like you're taking the money other people gave you and giving it to others instead. I mean, that's how life works, right? Like somebody pays you something and then you give that money to the grocery store or like the gas station or whatever. I think maybe this sort of thing, it looks perhaps weird because you see it. And maybe it would look weird if you could see like in real life, like, oh, this person is being paid by this employer and then they're giving their money to these people. But there isn't that transparency. But because there is transparency, and you can see, for example, that that I'm sponsoring Linus on GitHub, then it looks weird. But I don't know. I don't think that's weird. I guess I kind of like that. Let's see how that looks, actually. Yeah, see, it says I'm sponsoring Linus, right? And that doesn't feel weird, it feels good. George with the super chat. Thank you very much, George, saying, thank you for answering my question. Sure thing. Thank you very much for the super chat. And Danda says, hey, nice work. Thank you. That is very nice. We are almost out of time for this week. So if anybody has any last minute questions, now would be a good time. Carlos says, oh, hey, Carlos, I haven't seen you in a while. Has there been movement on having a video player / codecs in Serenity? Do you personally prefer porting something like VLC or building one from scratch? What about browser integration? I prefer building something from scratch, of course. That's what I prefer in every case. There has been movement on a VP9 codec. Hunter has been working on that, although I haven't seen Hunter for a few weeks. But it was making decent progress on it. And I think eventually we will want to integrate that with the browser. So we expand into something like libvideo or whatever, and have a way to integrate that with, for example, an HTML video element or something. But as with everything in the system, it just happens incrementally because people add support for the things that they're interested in. So Samuel says, you and Linus both sponsoring each other. Why not just not do that and save the fees? GitHub sponsors does not take any fees. And I like to support Linus here because it's my way to advertise, or it's one of the ways that I like to advertise Linus on GitHub sponsors, that people can see. People can see that Linus is there, and And there are no fees. Why do you care so much about this? Are you okay? I will brag on Linus's behalf. Check this out. This is so cool. One of Linus's sponsors is Nat Friedman, which is the CEO of GitHub. That I think is super cool. That's so cool. Let's see. James says, I'm finishing my software bachelor and would love to contribute and learn C++ in the meantime. Serenity is a wonderful project, but I think I would need guidance and I don't want to bother other devs. Well, like you can also just hang out and do some small things, and you will get comfortable when you do small things. And I think it's really not a bother when people ask questions that are clearly coming from a place of they're trying to fix something. If anything is bothersome, it's when people come and they talk about things, but it's kind of obvious that they have no intention of doing any of the work themselves. So as long as you're not like that, you're not going to really bother people, I think. But I don't know. Don't worry so much about that. Just start hacking on something and come talk about it when you need guidance. And we'll see how it goes. Let's see. David says, thanks for the stream. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Yes, we are about to run out of time here. So just says, just thanks a lot. I like to watch your videos, not just about technical. Also, your character really rocks. Well, that's great. Thank you. Let's see. Alexandra says, who or what gave you the idea to create an operating system from scratch? Now, since we are closing down, I will invite you and everybody else to check out the FAQ, which is linked in the pinned comment and also on the bottom left of the screen, and also now in a new comment, where you can find the answers to questions like, why are you building SerenityOS? I encourage you to check out the FAQ. And with that, let's close the stream. So thank you everybody so much for coming. I really appreciate all of the questions, all the super chats, and it's so nice that we're still doing this on Fridays. I really, really appreciate everybody coming and hanging out. And I think it's a nice thing we have going here. So I'll see you next time. Have a great weekend, and then do come to the SerenityOS Discord and hang out if you're working on something, and we can chat about it. See you.